that the delegates follow their instructions, what experiences of state governments under their new constitutions after independence might have influenced the creation of the Constitution, and do the decisions of the Supreme Court, U.S., function as a continuing constitutional convention? Why or why not? You may begin.
To know how the state constitutions influence the contents of the federal constitution, we must first know what documents influence the contents of the state constitutions. This document is known as the Magna Carta, which is a charter of rights given to English noblemen during the year 1215, and was signed by King John. The Magna Carta has been described as the first major constitutional document, the banner, the symbol of our liberties.
The next documents that influenced the state constitutions were the Colonial Charters of England's North American colonies. All 13 colonies had a charter, which is a written agreement between a colony and its king or parliament. The charters provided the king had direct rule over that colony, and the king also appointed the colony's governor, giving the king almost complete control of that colony. The colonies under these charters operated under the system of mercantilism, which is a system based on the belief that the colonies existed in order to increase the wealth of the mother country.
During the Revolutionary War, the states were advised by the Continental Congress to create their own constitutions. Although unique to each of the states' local experiences, many of these newly formed constitutions had the same foundations. The states incorporated the use of popular sovereignty, or rule by the people, into their new constitutions. The Magna Carta influenced state constitutions because many of the state constitutions had listed rights from the Magna Carta. One of these rights that many of the state constitutions listed was the right to a fair trial, which can be seen in Article 29 of the Magna Carta. The body of a free man is to not be arrested or imprisoned or diseased or outlawed or exiled or in any way ruined, nor is the king to go against him or send forcibly against him except by judgment of his peers or by law of the land.
By 1787, the Articles of Confederation were indubitably failing. Farmers were rebellion, the nation as a whole was failing financially, and the judicial and executive branches of the government were non-existent. So in an effort to correct the nation's government, the Continental Congress in February 1787 declared a resolution.
It stated, "It is expedient that on the second Monday in May next, a convention of delegates who shall have been appointed by the several states be held at Philadelphia for the sole and express purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation." From the contents of this quote, it is known that the original purpose of the Philadelphia Convention was to keep the current Articles of Confederation but revise the document. So from this information, the panel agrees that the delegates did not follow their instructions because a whole new governing document was formed.
During the Philadelphia Convention, the delegates elected to represent their state in amending the Articles of Confederation had decided to create a whole new constitution. This constitution was constructed from previous documents, such as the Magna Carta and the state constitutions. The states held amendment conventions and proposed amendments from their constitutions for the Bill of Rights under the federal constitution, and Article 29 of the Magna Carta is better known as a clause under the Sixth Amendment today. Also in the state constitutions, there was a separation of powers, bicameral legislatures, and a chief executive. All three of these concepts can be seen in the federal constitution.
Marbury v. Madison in 1803 was the first case in which the court declared an act of Congress to be unconstitutional. The ruling established the Supreme Court's power of judicial review, solidified the court as a co-equal branch of government, reinforcing the doctrine of separation of powers.
In Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896, the Supreme Court ruled that all African-American citizens were to be separated from white citizens, but the facilities used by both were to be equal. At this time, this seemed reasonable for the late 19th century and early 20th century, but 60 years later, with the rising popularity of the civil rights movement, led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., it can be seen that the public opinion of America was changing. Brown v. Board of Education in 1954 overruled Plessy v. Ferguson and desegregated public schools even if they were deemed separate but equal.
According to William Howard Taft in 1910, presidents may come and go, but the Supreme Court goes on forever. In a March 2018 survey, 55% of Americans said the Supreme Court should base its rulings on what the Constitution means in current times rather than what it meant as originally written, which was Pew Research. So collectively, the unit agrees that the Supreme Court acts as a continuing constitutional convention due to judicial activism in support of Pew Research.
Jack, why don't you start out?
I thought Joe was going to start. Sorry.
Okay.
I can start. I have no trouble. You accused the delegates at the Philadelphia Convention of not following their instructions, yet I believe it was 42 of the 55 people there were in the Congress that had issued those instructions. How is it that they got there and changed their minds, as you correctly state?
Well, the Articles of Confederation to amend required all 13 states or a unanimous vote to amend. Rhode Island did not send delegates to the Philadelphia Convention, so therefore the Articles of Confederation could not be legally amended. And then some of the delegates from Virginia had proposed the Virginia Plan, and that's basically what started off the creation of the federal Constitution.
And the Philadelphia Convention came from the Annapolis Convention, and the Annapolis Convention was about trade routes.
Do you, let me just follow up on that. I mean, do you think in a situation like writing a constitution, do you think it makes sense to follow legal procedures, right? Madison says in Federalist 40, for example, that we shouldn't be surprised that they did something different, right? That their charge was to do something to make government adequate and not to just follow their instructions. So should we have been surprised at that?
Well, if you paid attention to the current times going on, the Articles of Confederation were failing, but it was a necessary failure. And one thing that really pushed these delegates at the Philadelphia Convention to scrap the Articles of Confederation was that the Articles of Confederation, they didn't allow the national government to have the power to tax the states. And we can see this in Shays' Rebellion, because the rebels in Shays' Rebellion, they were Revolutionary War soldiers, and their farms were being taken away by the state of Massachusetts because they could not pay the mortgages on their homes and their land, because the national government could not compensate them for their services in the war. So a private militia had to be hired to put them down. And the delegates at the Philadelphia Convention, seeing that the Articles of Confederation would not hold the country together for very much longer. So to me, no, at the time, it wouldn't have been a surprise that they scrapped, that these delegates at the Philadelphia Convention scrapped the Articles and created a new constitution.
Okay.
Let's go to the ratification period. In your opinion, which of the anti-federalist arguments about the convention, not the Constitution, but about the convention itself, which anti-federalist criticism of the convention do you think was most persuasive?
That's a good question.
Well, of course, but
Yeah. So you're asking which anti-federalist view about the Philadelphia Convention, correct?
yeah, I mean, they had all kinds of criticisms about the convention, not the, I mean, they certainly had about the Constitution itself, but I'm asking about the convention itself.
Well, personally, I think the secrecy rule would be a little iffy to me, because if the people inside were keeping it secret from the people outside, I'd be a little suspicious about that personally.
Okay.
To agree with Owen, yeah, the secrecy rule, which basically stated the delegates of the Philadelphia Convention could not speak what was going on inside of Independence Hall, outside of Independence Hall. And as an average American, I would like to know what is being done to my national government. So I would agree with Owen here and say that the secrecy rule is probably the most persuasive thing.
Do you think they could have produced the Constitution that we got without the secrecy rule?
No, not in my opinion, no. Just because you have the Federalists and then you have the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists were more north, the Anti-Federalists were more south. Basically, to get to my point, if you say to the whole nation, yeah, we're going to change the Articles of Confederation, in my opinion, if I was living back in that time, that would cause huge uproar and huge unrest. Basically, we could have an earlier civil war as the country. I mean, you could have literally the entire country fighting itself over which document, or just say we can keep the Articles of Confederation or make a new one, and you would never find an outcome. You would just keep fighting because nobody could actually just have their own opinion.
And to go off what Elijah's saying, we had just fought a war against Great Britain to get away from a strong national government. That's why the Articles of Confederation focused more on the states, because we didn't want to have another do-over with the English government and have a strong national government. And I agree. I do not think that we could have the secrecy rule. I mean, I do not believe that we could have created the Constitution we have today without the secrecy rule, because as the average American at the time, the delegates at the Philadelphia Convention was taking away the power of the people, because as we all know, the 17th Amendment is the direct election of senators.
All right, Caleb, we're going to have to cut you off. So,
Okay.
I believe me, I'm as frustrated with that as you are. But so,
Dang it, man.
I'm sorry about that.
It's okay.
Does anybody else, Joe, Jag, anybody else want to start? You want me to start out or not?
You go ahead.
Okay, gentlemen, this was pretty good. Let me tell you, I was pleased to see. I forget who it was. Most people describe the Annapolis Convention as a failure. You didn't do that. You said, they had a pretty narrow agenda, and it was just trade. And I appreciate that observation. I also really appreciated your notion of popular sovereignty driving so much of this. I thought that was a good cite. 13 out of 13, Rhode Island wasn't there, so therefore a change of mind was good. I thought you handled those quite well. The only thing, I'm going to get a little